Today I'd like to talk to you about Amplify and React Native. So I also work at Theodore. I'm a software architect here, and I help clients generally building apps in React Native, and traditionally with Django backends in a typical containerized environment. So here we have the app I rebuilt for Made.com. It's a website in React, a mobile app in React Native, and then a touchscreen interface also in React served through Electron. But more recently at Theodore with clients, I've been working on serverless architectures and using serverless as the backend for React and React Native platforms. And outside of client projects, I've spent time researching in Theodore serverless best practices and trying to share them with the community. Serverless is a big part of how Amplify can help you power up your React Native app. So I'm going to talk quickly about serverless. I'm sure a lot of you have used Lambda functions potentially before of your full stack, or have heard of the concept. If not, I'll give the basics, and then I'll jump into React Native and how Amplify can speed you up. So serverless is the name of a library, which can be used for serverless architectures, which is a bit confusing. But serverless is also an architectural movement in two folds. First of all, it lets developers send just application code to be run in the cloud without having to dealing with hosting, complexities around networking. You just send your function in Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, and it will work in the cloud. Nothing more complex than that. Also, it's the idea of using third-party services when you can. Instead of building authentication, payments, PDF generation, whatever it is, trying to find services in your cloud provider or third parties to use, not build, and focus on writing the application code that is the business logic of your company. Oh no, here we go. So why use serverless? Well, there's a huge cost reduction. If you don't actually have servers, even if they're EC2s in the cloud auto-scaling, serverless is significantly cheaper. There's little to no ops needed, which massively reduces your team cost and also allows you to focus on writing application code. Developers can just focus on business value. You having user authentication is not what differentiates you in the market. It's your application code that's specific. And it's more scalable. And finally, once critical mass is reached with serverless architectures, a more efficient using of resources, with servers being used so inefficiently at the minute, will mean that the energy consumption is much lower. Energy consumption of things like Netflix, other data-heavy apps is becoming a growing problem. And although there are green data centers, reducing our our energy consumption will be massively beneficial. And it's not just Lambda. So AWS Lambda is one of the services that allows you to send application code to the cloud. But there are services like S3 for storage, DynamoDB is a database, API Gateway doing your routing and linking into your authentication with Cognito. This is an AWS example. Similar services are in Azure and others. SQS for your queuing system, and the newer service of EventBridge to handle an event-driven architecture in the cloud. On top of this, you have third-party providers allowing you to do authentication like Okta and other third parties in payment and other areas. And it gives you great power and flexibility. You can build the next Netflix with this. But it's not simple. Okay, we've abstracted away a lot of networking complexity, but there's still a lot of complexity of wiring all these parts together. And that's where Amplify comes in, if this clicker worked. That's where Amplify comes in to provide a declarative abstraction on top of all those services. Amplify is an AWS JavaScript framework that allows you to orchestrate the cloud in a really abstract and declarative way. As even a front-end engineer, you're able to use cloud services sort of out the box. It's a bit similar to Firebase, but with AWS as the backend, providing a more event-driven and more serverless-style architecture. So how do you get started? Well, you simply yarn add and React Native link, or an Expo, the React Native link part's already handled for you. You then run Amplify init. You'll have to have a cloud account with AWS. Jump through a few questions, even to the extent of what editor we're using, because it will do default code configurations for you. Jump through what JavaScript framework you're using. In this case, we're React Native, obviously. What you want your build scripts to be. Set up a profile, which you'll do automatically. That's the only time you'll hit the actual web console of AWS, and everything else is done for you. And then in your app.js, it's 3 lines of code. I'm sorry, none of these examples are in TypeScript, so don't kill me. And we run, let's say we want to have user authentication. So we're building an app that allows you to have, I don't know, the Airbnb of Uber, or whatever ridiculous startup we're doing. All you do is Amplify add auth, and that will automatically give you user authentication, password management, phone verification, single sign-on across Facebook, Google, many different providers in just 2 lines there. Push is pushing that to the cloud to orchestrate your architecture. And then in our app, we import a higher order component from the library. We wrap with authenticator of the app. And we're there. We have user login with phone verification email, all with the default setup. Now this is components coming from Amplify. You can use the underlying API, importing the components in a different way, and build your own custom login screen. Or if you're lazy like me, you can change the look and feel by just changing color configurations, and that will trickle through these screens. So now users can log in. Once we're logged in, we need an API. So again, it's Amplify add API. We can choose between GraphQL and REST. If we go for a GraphQL approach, we can use AppSync, which is AWS's services on top of any of its databases, which provides a GraphQL interface. So it will automatically build you a GraphQL interface to your RDS database or your DynamoDB. But here we're going to go for a REST approach. Now, with REST, it can automatically generate CRUD operations on your database. So automatically we can get an SDK where we can put users' content and retrieve users' content, but also we can just run any custom Lambda function, any custom business logic we want to run. So if we run through and select REST, we give it a sensible name, and I can't scroll, that's fun. Anyway, we give it a sensible name, and then we can even put that behind authentication. It will say, would you like this to be public accessible? We say no, and it will say, who do you want to access it? Well, authenticated users, the users who authenticated in the previous page, and then it will automatically generate for us, in JavaScript, if we chose that as our runtime, a backend function called /items, and all we're doing here is returning the event we get in. So it's not doing anything clever yet. It's using the serverless express library, which is a way of doing routing inside. API gateway is a way of doing routing as well. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. We can then create our server, export our handler, and now we have a function running in the cloud. We've not mentioned operating systems, we've not mentioned RAM, we've not mentioned anything. We just know this is going to be run in a scalable way and only as we use it. Again, Amplify push, you'll start to type that quite a lot. And how do we use the API? Well, in our app.js, we can import API from AWS Amplify. We can, I know I'm not using hooks or anything clever here, we can have state here, and then here we do, formatting's gone a bit weird, sorry, we have a get sample function. We're going to that /items path we talked about before, api.get, the name of the API and the path, and then that's done. It will only work if the user's logged in, so it's handling the JWT or the cookie authentication for you. You don't have to do any of that, and you're automatically pulling data from a database or running some job in the cloud. One more example, and then I'll just list the other functionalities it can give you, is analytics. So traditionally, we've done things like Firebase Analytics and Google Analytics in React Native. Page views don't work so well in React Native, but there are ways of making it a bit more constructive. But in AWS, they do have an analytics service. So we can Amplify add analytics and Amplify push. Then inside of our code, very similar to API, we import analytics from AWS Amplify. Component did mount. Let's say we want to record every time a component mounts. Let's say it's a page component. We do analytics.record, the first event name. And that's automatically pushed to the cloud. We can then use a service which is quite new called AWS Pinpoint. It's sort of like Google Analytics, which gives you daily active users, monthly active users, and many more statistics. It isn't available in all regions yet of AWS, but it's growing. And this can obviously be quite an efficient way to get analytics out the box. And you can move to other providers later on, but it's a very fast way to have it from day one. The other thing it can do is, I don't know if who's familiar with it, but Kinesis is a way in AWS of doing event-driven architecture. So you can have a stream of events, let's say a stream of tweets or whatever it is. Here we can have a stream of user events that go and trigger other things. Maybe it's trickling into our user engagement team every time people's apps are crashing. So they can get a real-time statistic on that. What else can it do? Well, we've gone through analytics. I mentioned GraphQL is a way we can access the database. Storage, so S3 is obviously quite used for user uploads, but it's a little bit complicated to configure, making sure the user has access to the right bucket, making sure it's not public. Quite a few people, including some banks, have had issues having public data in S3. This is handling that for you, so you just have on top of the authenticator, be able to put something specific to a user. Push notifications across Android and iOS. Interactions, so you can actually build chatbots very quickly with AWS's machine learning systems, and they even have a component library for those chatbots. Pub-sub architectures where you have events going from the front end to the back end. There's a lightweight internationalization service, an advanced caching service for some more advanced application data, some of the machine learning stuff, so Rekognition, which is an image classifier for images, and it can also detect objects in video streams, Poly, which is a text-to-voice, translation automatically, and natural language processing. And finally, there's XR, which is augmented reality and virtual reality. They're better supported in React at the minute with Amplify, and there aren't many examples with React Native, but it's something that's coming in the future. That was quite a lot of different services to go through. But in conclusion, serverless allows us to write more business value per line of code. Less line of code takes less time to write, and also you have less bugs. AWS Amplify is a really nice layer of abstraction on top of that. There are others, and there are things you can do in Firebase in a similar way, and I think Cloudflare now have functions you can run in the cloud, so lots of different services are going into this area. But combined with a serverless architecture and an abstract declarative interface to the cloud, you can build complex web-enabled applications very quickly in a few lines of code. It's very fast. If you want to have something really advanced, maybe it's better to do something that is more custom, so using the serverless library directly and having a little bit more time spent in working on the cloud interface and a little bit more of an understanding of the underlying networking. But from the point of view of being able to build something to market really quickly, AWS Amplify is a really great start there. As I mentioned at Theodore, I'm researching more of our serverless architecture best practices. I've recently launched a Medium blog. If anyone wants to check that out, if they're interested in serverless and what's happening in that community, feel free to have a look. And yeah, that was really it. If anyone has any questions, I'm on Twitter, and I'm also here to answer any if you have them right now.